Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AI Debates. Tonight, we will address a hotly debated issue dividing the West. Should ground troops be sent to deter Putin? As the Russian army continues to advance in Ukraine, some European officials openly discuss the idea of deploying Franco-British forces supported by other NATO countries. Is this a credible deterrent strategy, or rather a step too far that could lead Europe into total war? To discuss this, we have three guests tonight with very different positions. First, Stéphane Cherki, a French defense expert. Close to pro-Ukrainian views, he advocates for direct NATO forces engagement, but only alongside the United States, to stop the Russian army and demonstrate Western power. Good evening, Stéphane.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing a genuine debate on an issue essential to our collective security.
Next to him, Nikola Drovedev, former spokesperson of the Russian army and now a military analyst in Moscow. A supporter of the Kremlin's policy, he believes that talking about sending Western troops to Ukraine proves the West's panic in the face of a victorious Russia. Good evening, Nikola.
Good evening. Pleased to be able to remind some truths in the face of the illusions of certain Western experts.
Finally, General Philippe De Lottaz, former head of military intelligence for French forces in Africa. More neutral, he nevertheless considers that sending Western forces on the ground would be a major strategic mistake, a spiral toward direct conflict with Russia. Good evening, my general.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. It's a necessary debate because there are many fantasies to deconstruct.
Thank you all three. Three radically different perspectives that promise an animated debate. Before we start, if you enjoy these debates, subscribe, like this video, and most importantly, share your opinion in the comments. Should Western troops be sent to Ukraine to stop Putin? Your reactions fuel the show and help the channel grow. Without further ado, let's open the debate. Some officials in Europe talk about a scenario where French and British troops would be deployed in Ukraine to deter Moscow. Is this credible, realistic, or completely suicidal? Stéphane, I'll start with you.
It is not only credible, but necessary. We have seen the limits of purely logistical or material military aid. Despite deliveries of tanks, missiles, and drones, the Russians are still advancing. Why? Because they mock sanctions and exploit the wear of time. The only way to show them that the West is serious is to have a ground presence. Not necessarily to attack directly, but to secure certain areas, protect logistical lines, and most importantly, send a clear message. NATO is here, you shall not pass. But be careful. I repeat, the Americans must be with us. Without them, no credible operation. But with a coalition of France, the United Kingdom, Poland, Germany, and especially the United States, Russia would see that the joke is over.
Stéphane, your speech is typically that of a Western dreamer, fed on fake news from LCI. You talk about showing that NATO is serious, but you don't understand. Russia has never doubted that NATO was ready to invest money, weapons, and advisors. But sending troops is another story. It proves only one thing, that Ukraine and its Western sponsors are cornered. Because on the ground, it's over. Kyiv is retreating. You can send a few thousand French and British troops, but this is not Mali here. It's not a few rebels in the desert. It's the Russian army, the second largest in the world, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers and colossal firepower. Believe me, your scenarios are dangerous fantasies.
I will be clear. Sending ground troops is madness. Why? Because we do not have the means. The French army, at most, could deploy 8,000 men. The British, even less. And with that, we would claim to deter a Russian army that has more than 700,000 troops on the Ukrainian ground. It's ridiculous. Without the Americans, there is no possible scenario. And even with them, the risk of nuclear escalation is huge. Let's not forget, Russia has nuclear weapons, and Putin has reiterated this several times. Believing that we can secure zones with just a few French-British battalions is playing with fire. Diplomacy, as frustrating as it may be, is a much more realistic path than these total war scenarios.
My general, you are right on one point. Alone, we do not have the means. But that's why I talk about a coalition. France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, supported by the United States. There, we are talking about a credible force. Yes, Russia has hundreds of thousands of men, but their army has shown its limits. We saw it in Bakhmut, we saw it in Avdiivka. They advance, yes, but at the cost of colossal losses, with human wave tactics worthy of World War I. That's not what a modern great army is. Their only asset is nuclear terror. But precisely, if NATO shows its muscles on the ground, Putin recedes, because he knows he cannot face the most powerful alliance on the planet.
Stéphane, once again, you live in a Hollywood movie. You talk about coalitions, tanks, planes, but you forget one thing: willpower. Russia is fighting for its existence, for its territory, for its people. The West, on the other hand, is fighting for what? To save a corrupt regime in Kiev. And do you believe that the French, Germans, or Poles are ready to die for Zelensky? Let's be serious. Your armies no longer have stocks. Your societies do not want war. And your soldiers are not ready to face a power like Russia. This is not an external operation. It's total war. And in this scenario, the West would lose much more than it imagines.
I share this assessment. Our armies are at the bone. France has only 200 tanks, no more. Our ammunition stocks are laughable. We lack both the industry and the personnel to support a high-intensity war against Russia. Of course, on paper, a transatlantic coalition is impressive. But in reality, it would lead us to a direct confrontation with a nuclear power. I repeat, those in Paris or elsewhere who entertain the idea of sending troops should refrain. Because once soldiers are sent, there is no turning back. And that is the shortest path to a third world war.
If the West still decided to send ground troops to Ukraine, what would be the number of soldiers and heavy equipment needed to be taken seriously by Russia?
This is a key issue. To be credible, we must not talk about 5,000 or 10,000 men. That's symbolic. A deterrent force is needed, structured around mechanized divisions, with tanks, artillery, and air support. You can't face Moscow with 3 scattered brigades. But I repeat, if the United States commit, then the equation changes. The Americans have tens of thousands of deployable soldiers, hundreds of Abrams tanks, and formidable aviation. France can field a few thousand men, the British as well, and the Poles even more. Alone, each is weak. Together with the Americans in the front line, it's a force capable of stopping the Russian advance outright. We must stop trembling before Putin. Economically, his country has the GDP of Spain. We have the military and industrial power to make him understand that he cannot win.
Here, we reach heights of illusion. Stéphane talks about divisions, tanks, airplanes, but your armies don't even have what it takes to sustain 3 months of high-intensity warfare. France has only 200 tanks, the United Kingdom barely 100. You call that stopping Russia? It's a joke. Russia has 700,000 soldiers in Ukraine, hundreds of artillery systems, an arms industry operating at full speed. Do you think sending a few thousand French or Polish troops will change the balance of power? No. It will only give Moscow an even more spectacular victory, humiliating NATO armies on the ground. This isn't a credible deployment. It's a march toward disaster.
I share part of what Nikola says, even though I condemn the Russian aggression. Militarily, let's be realistic. To be taken seriously, at least 150,000 to 200,000 Western soldiers would need to be deployed, with colossal logistical support and ammunition stocks capable of lasting for months. However, we do not have that. France has 8,000 deployable men. The British, even fewer. Even the Poles, with their solid army, do not exceed 20,000 men mobilizable quickly. And all of this without counting equipment, tanks, artillery, aircraft, logistics. Europe no longer produces enough. The Americans alone have the means, but even they would hesitate facing the risk of directly confronting Russia. That is why this option is a mirage.
My general, I respect your analysis, but I think you underestimate the role of deterrence. It doesn't necessarily mean going into direct combat with 200,000 men. If NATO deploys 30,000 or 40,000 soldiers with modern equipment, and if the Americans place a few divisions in Eastern Europe, the political and psychological effect on Putin is immense. The Kremlin would understand that the red line has been crossed, that NATO is ready to fight. However, Putin is not suicidal. He plays with Western fears, but as soon as he senses real resistance, he retreats. We've seen this in Syria, we've seen it elsewhere. Yes, industrial effort is needed. Yes, we need to rebuild our stocks. But the West has the means. The real problem is not logistics, it's political courage.
Political courage? Call it rather recklessness. You're talking about sending 40,000 soldiers against a Russian army of several 100,000 men. You forget that this is not Iraq or Mali. Here, we have drones, hypersonic missiles, massive artillery, and above all, a determination that your comfort-driven societies lack. And if, by some misfortune, NATO were to kill too many Russian soldiers, you know very well what would happen. nuclear escalation. So yes, Stéphane, you can play the hawk in your Parisian studios, but the reality is that this kind of scenario would end Europe as you know it.
I will be blunt. To be taken seriously, we would need resources that we do not have. Our armies are reduced, our stocks are empty, and our societies are not prepared for total conflict. Even with American support, a frontal war against Russia would be madness. It's not a matter of willpower, but of the balance of power. The Russian army is weakened, yes, but it remains massive and capable of absorbing shocks. On the other side, our European armies are calibrated for overseas operations, not for industrial war. Sending 30,000 or 40,000 men is symbolic. Sending 200,000 is impossible. The conclusion is simple. This is not a viable military option.
Some claim that a limited deployment of Franco-British forces, ideally with the United States, would create a threshold effect capable of deterring Moscow. Others see it as a slippery slope toward escalation. Who is right? Stéphane, over to you.
Deterrence is not an incantation, it is a mechanism. Capability plus will plus clarity. If a credible Allied presence is established in Western Ukraine, Franco-British troops supported by American means, multi-layered air defense, permanent air patrols, ISR assets, electronic warfare, the game changes. Not to march on Moscow, but to secure a perimeter, Lviv, logistical routes, humanitarian hubs, and make the Kremlin understand that the cost of striking NATO forces would be exorbitant. Yes, this requires a clear message from Washington. Without the USA, we do nothing. But with them, NATO becomes credible again. And I already hear Nikola talking about Western panic. The only panic I see is that of a Russia with the GDP of Spain, which, on the battlefield, advances in human waves to gain 3 kilometers of forest. The real escalation is inaction.
Your mechanics, Stéphane, is seminar theory. Deterrence only works if the adversary believes you. But Moscow neither believes in your capability nor your will. You have neither stocks nor munitions nor political consensus. The first coffin repatriated to Paris or London, and your parliaments will scream withdrawal. You talk about sanctuarizing Lviv? Very well. At the first shot against a NATO unit, do you declare total war on Russia? No. So it will be a bluff. And Moscow would treat this tripwire as such. This is not Mali here. It's a nuclear power with hundreds of thousands of men engaged. Your deterrence would be a strategic gift, an opportunity to show European military impotence without Washington in the front line.
Dissuasion also involves managing escalation. An activation thread combined in Ukraine would create an automatic dilemma: initial losses, obligation to go to war, otherwise loss of credibility. What rules of engagement? Who decides when thresholds are crossed? Deep strikes, cyber, space, tactical nuclear. Today, no political or logistical framework exists to support such a face-off over months. There is a confusion between posture and capability. Militarily, our European armies are scaled for limited overseas operations, not for industrial confrontation. Deterrence through ground troops in its current state is unstable and dangerous. Viable deterrence instead relies on remote means, integrated air defense, long-range capabilities, intelligence, economic pressure, and deconfliction channels.
My general, I agree with you on the necessity of rules of engagement. That is precisely why I repeat, with the United States or not at all. But be careful not to confuse risk with capitulation. For 3 years, the Western message has been ambiguous. Putin tests, advances, tests again. A declared presence line, geographically limited, backed by strict ROEs, zero incursion, 0 strikes outside the perimeter, coupled with an aerial cover, Patriot, SAM-T, US aircraft gap, and a total economic ultimatum, energy high-tech, changes the Russian calculus. Russia understands the balance of power. And I tell Nikola again, I prefer to assume firm deterrence, clear, well-defined, rather than wait for the next Ukrainian city to fall, hoping that it will satisfy Moscow. History shows that weakness has never deterred anyone.
You confuse media spectacle with strategic reality. Cap, Patriot, ultimatum, very good on PowerPoint. But who puts the ground troops? Without Washington leading the column, none of this exists. And even with Washington, where is the American interest in entering direct war against Russia? You mentioned GDP. Despite Spain, it is the Russian army that advances, and your technological superiority has not reversed the trend. Your deterrence would be the final admission. The West has lost the Ukrainian gamble, and is seeking an exit by bluffing. Tell the truth to the French. You are playing with the apocalypse to save NATO's image.
Good deterrence is credible, controllable, sustainable. Today, deploying troops does not tick any of these boxes on the European side. Credible? No. Limited personnel, low stocks, undersized industry. Controllable? No. Fragmented political chain, high risk of misunderstanding and overreaction. Sustainable? No. Opinions and budgets at the limit. However, deterrence can be achieved differently. Thicken the Ukrainian sky, air defense, electronic warfare, decoys, infrastructure hardening. Increase the range and precision of Ukrainian fires within a strict and deconflicted targeting framework. Greatly multiply intelligence, ISR, cyberspace. Revive the ammunition industry and logistics at scale. Reopen a robust diplomatic channel, including through Washington, to set thresholds and prevent accidents. Knowing when to abandon a bad option is also a deterrent, by showing that we choose controlled escalation, not a leap into the void.
We are coming to the end of this passionate debate. Before concluding, I will give each of our guests a final word. Stéphane Cherki, I start with you.
Thank you. My last word is simple. If we do nothing, if we keep hesitating, Putin will keep advancing. Ukraine is our barrier. Yes, sending troops involves risks, but doing nothing is even more risky. Russia has a GDP comparable to Spain. It relies solely on nuclear threats and an archaic army that sacrifices its soldiers. If NATO, with the United States at the forefront, deploys a credible force, then Moscow will retreat. True escalation is not deterrence, it is passivity.
Thank you, Stéphane Cherki. Nikola Drovedev, your final word.
Yes, thank you. I will be clear. The idea of sending French or British soldiers to Ukraine proves that the West has already lost. You do not have the means, the will, or the unity. On the ground, it is Russia advancing, not NATO. And if you foolishly send troops, it will not be a remake of Mali. It will be Russia facing you, the second army in the world, with nuclear escalation as an option. What we see is not Ukraine's defeat, but the defeat of the West.
Thank you, Nikola Drovedev. My general, you have the final word to conclude this debate.
I will be clear, sending Western troops to Ukraine would be a major strategic mistake. Our armies are too small in numbers, our stocks are empty, and our societies are not prepared for a high-intensity conflict against Russia. France has 200 tanks and 8,000 deployable troops. Facing 700,000 Russian soldiers, it would be suicidal. Deterrence must exist, but it relies on diplomacy, industrial support, air defense, and political clarity. Those proposing to send French soldiers onto Ukrainian soil should consider the consequences. It would be the shortest path to a third world war.
Thank you three for these clear positions. Three perspectives. Three very different readings of the same dilemma. Should we risk direct confrontation to save Ukraine, or look for other deterrence options against Moscow? And you, dear viewers, what do you think? Should Western troops be sent to Ukraine to deter Putin, or is that madness with incalculable consequences? Before we leave, remember, subscribe, like this video, and most importantly, share your opinion in the comments. Your reactions keep the show alive and help the channel grow. Thank you for watching this new episode of AI Debates. See you very soon for a new face-off on global current events.